All right, everybody. Welcome to 3D Bootcamp test session. Today we will be modeling a barrel inside of Blender. And we'll be going through the way Blender works, how its UI is set up, and how we use it as 3D artists in our everyday workflow. So, oh, you fucked up my key bindings. When we open up Blender for the first time, we will be met with our general scene, which has a cube, a light, and a camera. To start us off, we need to know how to remove things from the scene and how to navigate around the scene. So we'll just stick on with this one a little bit. To navigate around inside of Blender, we need to use our middle mouse button and drag it. This will orbit around our center of our view. If we hold down Shift and middle mouse button, we will pan. Shift Control, or Control and middle mouse button, and we will zoom in and out smoothly. You can also zoom in steps using your scroll wheel. And if you hold down Alt and middle mouse button, you will snap to what's called orthographic view. Orthographic view is a view without perspective and is very useful when we do 3D modeling after concept art, which we won't be doing today. All right, if you click on something, you can select it. By default, your selection tool is set to box select and allows you to drag a box by left clicking and holding, and you can then select multiple things inside your scene. You can change the way you select by pressing W to cycle through the four main ways of selecting things. Draw select, where we can draw over whatever it is we want to select. Draw select, yes, they're both called draw select. It's a silly way of naming it, which allows you to draw like a mask or a box that will say what it is you select. Select and tweak, which will allow you to select something and move it about. And back to box select. Yes?
So, first of all, there's people in the chat that are missing a hi from you, and there's more engagement if you can say hi to them.
Oh. Hello, my name is Chelfe. I am a teacher and technical artist at Truemax, or CADA Truemax, and the local Blender user, and therefore I am here teaching you today.
There's also an audio channel issue that the audio is only set on one side of the mic. So if you can go into the settings and...
Audio is only set up in one. Isn't that because the microphone's just on one side of my head?
No, but it needs to be duplicated because there's two of them. There's two ways to fix it actually.
So either I need to wear both microphones or...
By video like this.
Can we not just tell it not to be in stereo?
It should not, and that's one thing. It actually might now be in stereo. It should be working now. It should be working now.
Is that something on the...
Which is, why are you teaching in Blender and not Maya?
So the reason we're teaching in Blender and not Maya is the price. So Maya, even if, well, you can get student versions of Maya, but they have become exceedingly difficult to get, since now they are actually validating student IDs instead of just taking your word for it. And they only count for 1 year, while Blender comes with the beautiful, beautiful price point of nothing. And it's free to use up to a certain level commercially. Like, as long as it's not, you know, Disney or Sony sitting and following along here, it's free. You can use it for whatever you want to. And that's why we use Blender. But in practice, any 3D software works just as well as the other one. Some of them are better at other things. Blender is what's called a DCC, Digital Content Creation suite, and it's just a generalist program, which means it'll be really good at a lot of things. But if you have a specialized program, those will be better than Blender will. All right. So, since today we're just going to be modeling, we can take our light and our camera and we can delete them. The way we delete things inside Blender is by selecting them and then either pressing delete on our keyboard or X. And this will bring up a little prompt just so, you know, you don't delete something by mistake. The X is very close to a lot of other keys that you use fairly often, so it can be nice to have. So, the three most used tools inside of Blender are the Grab, Rotate, and Scale tool. they have their own hotkeys, or you can activate them out here on your left-hand side. Do note they will behave differently if you activate them than if you use the hotkeys. But yeah, that's up to you. That's a workflow thing. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, as long as you get a good result in the end. I use the hotkeys, just as a quick disclaimer. And the way to activate the hotkeys is, of course, by pressing them, and we press the G for the grab and move tool. You can see now I can move around in 3D space. I can also lock them to the different axes inside 3D space. So we have our Y-axis, which is our green one. And by pressing Y on our keyboard, I can lock my movement to that keyboard. If I press X, I will lock my movement to that axis, and Z, I'll lock my movement to the Z axis. Now, if we want to move something on two axes, we simply press grab, or G, and then shift and the axis we don't want to move on. So here I'm moving on the X and Y axis, but not the Z axis, because I told it to exclude that one. And that also works if I press Shift X, now I'm moving only in the Y and Z, and Shift Y, so on and so forth. And if we are currently doing a movement we don't like, and we would like to cancel it, we can right-click before left-clicking, and this will then cancel the movement entirely. The next tool we have is the Scale tool. By default, it scales everything uniformly, but just like with our Move tool, we can scale it in specific axi by locking them to it, or two, or another two, so on and so forth. The last tool we will use, albeit a bit less today, but still, is the Rotate tool. You can rotate freely, this is not recommended, or you can lock it to axes. If you are used to a different 3D software, if you've tried a different 3D software and you're here to familiarize yourself with this one, note that Blender doesn't rotate with the axis, it rotates around the axis. So you can see here I'm rotating around my Y-axis, and in most other software what you would do is you would rotate with the Y-axis instead. Just a little side note for anybody who needs to, transition. All right, so we need to turn this into a barrel. And right now we don't have a lot of options other than moving, scaling, and rotating, but we can change the mode we are working in 3D with by either pressing Tab, and this will get us into what's called Edit mode, or going up here on the left-hand side and then change to Edit mode manually. And you can also see there's a lot of other ones, but these two are the ones we're going to use for modeling today. So, inside Edit mode, we have three different ways of selecting and working with our meshes. The first one is Vertex mode. Vertices are points in space, and that's it. All you can really do to them is move them about, because they're points in space. You can't scale them because they don't have any scale. You can't rotate them because, well, they don't have form or function to rotate. They just have their location. What you can do is select two, and those you can scale and rotate, which leads us on to between two vertices we can draw an edge. And edges behave exactly like two vertices do. When you have three or more edges, you can have a face. Everything that is visible inside 3D has faces. Well, when we're talking models, there are other things like particles and stuff like that. They have faces, and we can edit those into becoming whatever we want with enough time and practice. So what we're going to start with is going into face mode, selecting the top face of our soon-to-be barrel, our cube, pressing G to move, Z to lock it to the Z axis, and move it upwards. Because now we have a oblong, or we have a rectangle, and that is closer to the cylindrical shape we want at the end of this tutorial. Now we need to round our barrel a little bit out, and to do this we will use the tool called loop cut. Now the loop cut is out here on the right hand side. There is a shortcut for it, but I dislike the way the shortcut works, so I would always recommend using this one. That's back to the movement tools. The tools work differently when you activate them out on the left hand side and when you use the shortcuts for it instead. But alright, so what our loop cut will do, yes?
So we have a couple of questions from the stream. One of them is that the program looks very complicated. Is it normal for everyone starting out in 3D Plus? Or if starting out in 3D to have a complicated program?
Yes, so the programs look complicated. Trying to understand everything at once will lead to information overload, and you won't understand any of it. So it's better to take it step by step. So understanding that if you're going to model something, then start by that, because basically everything in 3D will start with a model. So you should learn how to model first and learn the tools necessary for that. And then when you're comfortable with that, move on to the next point, move on to the next point. And as you move through the different disciplines inside of 3D, you get a lot better understanding of the UI. And the fact that the UI is only there to sort of help you, even though it's complicated, but it's not necessary. You can do everything without the UI. So don't worry too much that things are complicated. They will make sense eventually. Give yourself the chance to learn the program. You don't have to be an expert from day one. That would be a shame. Yes?
Very good. I'm going to challenge you a little bit here. Try and get the answers within 20-30 seconds because we have a few more. And
Yeah.
if we go too long, it will take too long to answer.
Well, some of them will be quick and other of them are teaching experiences.
Somebody's writing, I love 3D and would like to learn more about it. What should I do?
Well, you should decide what it is you love about 3D. If you love making 3D models, then you should simply just sit down and try to model things. Take something from your kitchen and try to model that. Make a cup. Make a salt shaker. Make anything you want. That is the best way. Sitting down and continuing to fall in love with it will help you learn it.
Is there a difficulty variation from Blender to Maya, or are they the same?
The principles of 3D don't change. The software's hotkeys and the way some of the tools function change, but apart from that, it's 3D is 3D. It's the same. Can you draw? You can likely draw with a pencil, and you can probably also draw with a pen. The tool doesn't matter, it's your skill set that does. All right, so just in case somebody missed it, I made 2 loop cuts on the vertical faces. And as you can see, the loop cuts will go all the way around our object. And this is what we really want our loop cuts to always go all the way around, because we want what's called good topology. And topology is the way faces and edges run along our object. It's not some arcane lore, it's just, you know, the way faces and edges run along the object. Good topology is everything is a square or a triangle, and you can create loop cuts that don't spiral out on your model. All right, so I created those 2. You can see my loop cut tool is still activated, so I'm going to press W to get back to selection mode, because now I want to select both my loop cuts. And to select a loop, we can hold down Alt and left click. This will select a loop. And if we hold down Alt, Shift, and left click, we can add to that selection another loop. So now we have the 2 cuts we just made, and we want to scale these out so that instead of a cube, we get a octagon. So we're going to press S, Shift, Z to only scale in the X and the Y axis. This will give us a uniform scale on both the X and the Y axis and allow us to create a octagon. This is a lot closer to a cylinder, and we can refine it up later if we want to. All right, next step is creating the bulge of the barrel here. And we'll do that by adding another loop cut. Oof, that sucks. All right, so we added another loop cut. It's automatically selected for us, and then we can scale this out. Now note that I can scale this out without defining an axis, because we know this loop cut is straight in the Z axis, whenever we scale out, it will only scale in the X and Y axis because it doesn't have anything to scale on the Z axis. It multiplies its own value on top of each other with however much you drag this. Now take this and then make it a little bit over exaggerated for what it is you want. And with it still selected, we're going to use the bevel function, Control B. This will divide our selection into two edges with a face loop between them. We can add extra loops inside by scrolling on our scroll wheel. You can see I'm scrolling up and down. And this will round out our shape. So what the bevel does is it creates a new set of loops with the average value of the two edges of the original, or the two edges coming into the original edge we selected. There we go. This now becomes our bulge for the barrel. Still funny. All right. So, yes?
We have a few small technical questions. Maybe you can help them, or if not,
Yes. Come on.
try our best in the chat. Somebody says, help, my loop doesn't go all the way around my cube. It stops halfway. What do I do?
Your loop doesn't go all the way around your cube. It stops halfway.
Yeah.
So if you have the loop cut and you do like this, and it doesn't go all the way around, have you... So what is happening? I know that much. I don't know how you got to it because I can't see your model right now. What you have likely done is you've created a face that has more than 4 vertices. Now, even though we have something that looks square, if it has more than 4 vertices, it's not a square. It's a n-gon. It's a wrong polygon. And while Blender itself is quite good at handling n-gons, if you want to take it into any other program, you will get errors. So when we are beveling, extruding, all these things, we'll get to the extrusion. We need to make sure that we always have loops selected. If I select these two faces, here we go, and bevel them like we just did, you can now see this here is no longer a square. It's, I think they're called rhomboids. And my loop cut won't work if I have that selected, or if I've made these, because it no longer knows which way to go across my object. So if you are in a position where you cannot, where you have like this type of geometry, you need to go through it in vertex mode and clean up whatever it is you have, so that you are sure that all your faces only have 4 corners, 4 vertices. All right, so I'm going to press 3 on my keyboard to go into face mode. I'm going to select the top of my barrel and the bottom of my barrel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the lip and the lid in 4 quick movements. I'm going to slow it down for you guys, of course, but because we want this to have a bit more definition. So with the top and the bottom selected, I'm going to press I for inset on my keyboard. And what you can see is it creates the same sort of geometry as a bevel does. It has this, it creates an extra loop around our selection, but I am locked to the size of the of my original face selection. So I can only make it smaller, I can't make it bigger. After I've done this, I will now press E to extrude, and this is pretty much the same tool, but this one has no limitations. It's only it's the same as the inset, but it is completely free transformations, free movements. And to begin with, it's locked to the Z axis, to its own Z axis, I should say. But I don't want these to move like a piston. I don't want the bottom and the top to move the same way. I want them to move towards each other. So before I left click, I'm going to press S and Z, so I only scale in the Z axis. And now you can see I'm scaling away from the middle of those two. And I'm going to inset them into the barrel like this. You can see I get a little lip, a little, like the boards that go around the barrel, they create this little lip for us. And then I'm going to repeat that process by, and press I for inset, create a little inset, ES sed to extrude outwards. So this will create the lid for me, but I still have this little moat around the lid that differentiates it from the rest of the model. Is everybody with me so far? Do we have any questions?
Somebody's asking and saying they really like this workshop. Is there any more in-depth 3D courses you do at CADA?
Yes, so we do 3D fundamentals where we will go into more depth with 3D and go into the different aspects. We'll start out with hard body modeling, which is what we're doing right now, and then touch upon soft body modeling, UV unwrapping, texturing, shading, rendering, and it will prepare you to go into the education as a 3D digital artist. It will also, the price for that fundamentals course will then, transfer over to the course of, or the price of the actual education and be subtracted from that. All right. Any other questions, or should I move on?
There was a tech issue earlier. Somebody said they couldn't get the balls to work, and they asked which buttons did you click.
Okay, so that is actually less of a human error and more of a Blender error. So I'm just going to go out of my barrel here and create a new cube. What can sometimes happen inside of Blender is when we have a cube or when we have any 3D model, all the things we do to it, all the bevels and extrusions and things like that, can mess up the way the model sees itself. It's pretty hard to do on purpose because, well, it's not a feature, it's very much a bug. But let me see if I can attempt here. Yeah, it's going to be a wonky shape, but I'm going to try my best. Trust me, I am professional. All right. So what I did is I pressed Control B to create a bevel. If the bevel doesn't do anything for you, which is what I suspect is happening, what you need to do is press Tab to go out of edit mode, and then Control A, and this will apply. So this will apply all, either your location, rotation, and scale, all these things. What you need to do is hit all transforms here, and this should reset your mesh so that it understands itself better. And that should fix the fact that the bevel doesn't work. This also has a lot of things to do with further steps. If you're doing texturing, unwrapping, all these things, you should probably also do this at the beginning, because your model will most likely mess itself up a little bit. For those of you who know Maya, applying transforms is freezing transforms and deleting history. All right. Why am I currently locked to edit mode? There we go. All right, back to our barrel. Now we want to create the bands that go around the barrel. And you can either do that now together with me, or if you want to define your barrel more, make it rounder, then add more loop cuts and then do the same scale trick that we did earlier. I can show you here. Quickly add 4 loop cuts. Gonna select them. You can see they go all the way around our barrel. S, Shift, Z to scale out. And now we can round out our barrel even more. So that's just a stylistic choice. If you like to have it rounder or not, do that now. All right. After we've done that, if you've decided to do that, we need to make the bands of our barrel. So I'm going to hold Alt and select, oh, I need to turn that off, Alt and select the face or the edge loop that is sort of in the middle and the corresponding one on the other side of it. We are going to bevel these edge loops, but we don't want any subdivisions in the middle, so we can scroll our scroll wheel to have none. And then bevel to sort of the size you think your barrel should have its bands going around the object. From here, we could, just like we did with the top, we could extrude them like this, but we might want to go in and edit the main shape of the barrel. So we're not going to do that. We're actually going to duplicate them and then create them as their own separate sub-objects. So we're going to press Shift D with the faces selected. And you can see now I've duplicated the faces, but without the rest of the model. And then I can press S, Shift Z to scale them out so that they stick just a little bit out of the barrel. But now we want to create the top faces here that the extrusion would have given us for free, but we want to have more control. We want to make these ourselves now. So I am selecting by holding Alt and Shift down and clicking on the edge loops, or the edges, all 4 of those loops. Now I'm going to press Shift E to extrude. No, sorry, Control. Wow. Sorry, let me just get, there we go. I'm going to press E to extrude, S, Shift Z, and extrude them inwards. Now, it's okay to have these penetrating the barrel. That's not going to give us any issues. So, but we do need to have them like as close to the barrel as possible. So we want them to, I mean, you can try and line it up, but just having them penetrate will work out better. All right. So this is a fairly good point to take a break. So everybody take a 5 to 10 minute break, have a quick pee, have something to drink, stretch your legs, look out a window. It is important to not stress your brain out too much. And then when we'll come back, we're going to start refining the shape of the barrel a little bit. All right. Yes, I was muted. All right, welcome back after this simulated break, and we will continue on with our Blender. So, as you can see here, I have tabbed out of my edit mode. Yes?
One thing, maybe stream is a little bit delayed, but there's a few questions from the audience.
Yes.
Somebody was saying that there are two different styles when making 3D, stylized and realism. What's best to start with, and
Realism.
is one of them easier than the other?
Oh, stylized is easier than realism, but realism is the correct place to start. And the reason for that is it's easy for you to do stylized modeling or stylized sculpting, stylized anything pretty much, if you're just looking after somebody else's stylized things and doing that. But if you want to create your own one, you need to understand how things are built up and how things look. So getting realism down first is more important to understanding how to stylize things later. So if you're simply looking at it as brass tacks, what should I learn first? Realism, then stylized. If you're making something and you want to make something that just looks cool here and now, then go stylized. Look at your reference, look at your concept art that you want to create, and then make that. It's a question of aesthetics and taste, and that's sadly not something that I can give you a spreadsheet that says this is right and this is wrong. It would be great to do it. But if you're learning 3D, like try to aim for realism, and then when realism is sort of there, you're gonna hit uncanny valley, and that is a point where I'd say that's good enough. Don't need to go further than that. Then start fucking about and finding out with your stylized things instead. And I think that's probably that is what I would say is the best way of figuring out. Because that also means you're going to play around a lot more with your software, and that will give you a lot quicker and better result as a learning experience because you're trying to learn.
I'll make a reminder again that we need to keep the questions about 20-30 seconds. This was 2 minutes. So, another question?
Yeah.
So someone from the chat I know should also have a mic on, and you should be able to hear me. This is the moderator Vidar. I was wondering what kind. So a question here from Edward is: I was wondering what kind of 3D work Chelfa has done in the past.
So what I've done some work on commercials and computer games, and I am currently also in my spare time a miniature designer, as well as I'm the Unreal technician here at CADA. Yeah. I can't talk a lot about the computer game stuff because I'm under NDA, but I can tell you as much as they're not released, so you haven't played them. All right. Okay, so as we can see here with our barrel, I am currently in object mode. Every now and again, certain faces will start to blend into each other. That's very specific for right here at the top. You can see the lid and the lip or the edge here of our barrel. They're blending into each other. So we want to break up that shape. And that is also a basic principle inside 3D, is that angles inside 3D are sharper than any realistic angle ever will be. So if you have 90-degree angles here, this is sharper than the sharpest knife you've ever seen a infomercial about. And that doesn't exist in real life. All corners have some sort of little bevel on them that will catch a little bit of light. And we can, of course, what we do is we add a bevel to it to make this more clear. There are two different ways of doing this. We can either go in and we can define specifically what edges it is we want beveled and how much we want them beveled. So if I take the bands here, I can say Control B to bevel, and you can see I can control the amount of bevel I have. Or we can add a overall bevel to our model. Now this is the one I'm not a particularly big fan of because you give up a lot of control, and I don't like doing that when I create models. But out here we have our properties tab. I am currently blocking it, I'm sorry, there we go. We have our properties tab. And in our properties tab, we have this little modifier properties. These modifiers are procedural effects we can add to our models or even add to VFX if we're doing fire, if we're doing smoke and all these things. We can add these things. And one of these is called bevel. It will add a procedural bevel to everything, but it's going to be a uniform bevel. So if you're creating a object where everything needs to have sort of the same stylized look, then this uniform bevel is very good because that means all your bevels will be the same size. But like said, I'm not a fan of it. I like to make my bevels by hand, for better or for worse. So I pick all of the edges or all of the loops that I know are going to have the same sized bevels and bevel them together so they have the same amount of bevel. There we go. Okay, take all these, I bevel them. So these are going to have a big bevel. And then when I go down, I select my bands. I want these to have a smaller bevel. So I can create that here. You can see because I am doing this manually, I'm getting more control. I can make sure that this looks the way I want it to look instead of just having a uniform bevel over everything. And that's a style choice. That's neither of them are correct, neither of them are wrong. Simply, how do you want to work? All right. So this is a fairly good barrel, but maybe you want to add a little bit more detail. Like if you want to make the boards individually, you can do that. I think I would do it in a different way, but you can definitely do that. So if we select the top of one board, but on the inside of the lip, because we have to select everything that would be the board, and then the corresponding one on the bottom, but holding down Control, this will select the shortest path between the two faces you've selected. Now, in loops, that will most likely be the edge loop. Like that will be the edge loop you're selecting. If you're selecting two things like this, it'll just find the shortest path there in whatever way it can. So, let's see, I'm a little bit off there. Boom, 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 boom. And now, with this face, not loop, because it's not a loop anymore, we're not selecting all the way around, we can then extrude it by simply pressing E to extrude. And you can see that I have a blue line across my screen, and this is the local Z axis, which means that I'm moving the way the faces are turning, or the average way the faces are turning. And I can then move it out just a little bit, enough to give it an edge that will define it. And if we do this for every board, we can also change in the height and stuff like that. Like if I go back in here and select it and create variation, this will create a more realistic look, because even though we're trying to create a realistic one that are handcrafted and perfect, there will always be that little bit of variation and it looks better to the human eye. And that's a design thing more than anything else. So let's scale that up. And then once we do this for every board or every other board, we then have a more realistic looking barrel. You see, that adds the extra definition. We get that little sharp indent to catch some light. And we can just continue on doing that. That is if that is what you want to do. I am not telling you that you should do it. It is a style choice, and you should be allowed to experiment as much as you want. But yeah, you do see that doing this for every corner or for every board actually adds a lot of detail. But I want to make sure that my boards stay inside the bands. I don't want to like move outside of my bands. That's fine. We can also scale them a little bit on the y-axis, make it a little bit smaller. So, and that will really add some visual interest to your barrel, which can be quite nice. We can also do it for the lid if we want to. We can create like boards across here, but then first we need to straighten out these edges. And the way we do that is by selecting said edges, by either control selecting or just selecting them one at a time, and then scaling them in whatever axis we want them to be planar with or be flat with. So in this case, it's going to be the x-axis. Scaling them with the x-axis until they have 0 scale in the x-axis. And by that, what I mean is pressing X, and then dragging the mouse towards the center of our selection. You can see now this one becomes planar with the x-axis. And that allows us to extrude the selected faces into becoming boards on the top of our barrel. I'm just going to do the same thing for the other side. Boop. There we go. And now going back into face mode by pressing 3, I can extrude these up or down to create boards that will be visually interesting. Now do note you need to select everything you want to extrude, or they are going to be separate parts, or like they're going to look separate. And then if you are going to move them up or down, lock them to the specific axis you want them to be or to move up or down in. And that is the Z axis most of the time. But it is the world Z axis and not the local Z axis. So in case you want to move if you extrude something and you want to move it in the Z axis, you got to double tap the Z to make sure you move it in the world axis. So see here, I'm extruding, moving in my local Z axis, the selections Z axis. Press Z, I'm free moving, press Z again, and I'm moving in the world Z axis. All right. So, unless there's anything else, this is actually kind of it. Any more questions from the audience?
So you can choose if we're now going into the Q&A portion of it.
Yeah.
If you have questions, yes.
Now we're going to go to the Q&A portion of it and allow everybody to ask questions about not just 3D, but also anything you can think of. Some things I'm not qualified to answer, but give it a shot.
We do have some questions from the stream.
Yeah, come on.
One of them is, I hear that the teachers in the 3D industry has their own way when creating 3D. Isn't there one way to create 3D, or is it varying from person to person?
It is varying from person to person. There are specific rules of what you need to have. So if you're doing 3D models, for example, there are specific rules about the way that topology needs to go across your model, depending on what it's going to be used for. So we differentiate things between hard surface and soft surface objects. And what that means isn't it's a building or it's it's an asset or it's a biological thing. It's whether or not something needs to deform in animation. And if you need things to deform, they need to be made in a very, very certain way. There's more freedom when doing prop art, but for this, it's for hard surface, you can sort of go a little bit off the rails and create some wonky geometry. But for soft surface, there are some very, very specific rules that things need to follow or things won't animate correctly. And it doesn't really matter how you get to the result. it's the result that matters, not the process. And people have varying processes, no matter what their background is, everybody will likely have one way of doing it that differentiates between somebody else. Um, I know from myself, I'm a tool user. I use the tools I'm given. So I'll use the tools inside Blender. I'll use the automated function, or some of the automated functions. I'm not going to use smooth and automated bevel and stuff like that. But there are certain functions I will use to get a result. But I have colleagues who will do everything like bare basics, and then somebody who will use as many automated processes as possible. Um, and while that is super confusing for somebody who's going to start, it's about trying things and figuring out what works for you.
Next question is somebody saying, I want to get started in 3D. What should I do?
Download Blender and try. I will though say don't do the infamous Blender donut, because it doesn't actually teach you 3D. The only videos of that are sort of worth watching are the later ones about shading, rendering, lighting, and stuff like that. They are really, really good, but the introduction to modeling and stuff is not. My best suggestion is simply start making things inside 3D. The tools I've shown you today are the tools that everybody uses to create a result. The way they get to it, the way you make your barrel, the way you make a cup, it's whatever works, really. We can I mean, we can smooth this barrel all the way out by adding what's called a subdivision surface, you can see, and then we can edit this instead. And while like everything's been smoothed out, but all my original geometry is still here. There we go. And I can then just edit this to become something. This isn't wrong, it's just not my preferred method of doing things. So trying out different ways, and playing around with it until you figure out what it is that works for you. Your workflow is more important than like what works for you is more important than having somebody else's workflow or the best workflow, because there is no best workflow. There's best practices, and those practices are the results, not the way you reach them.
Next question from Christian is, gotta go now, but fantastic live stream. We'll definitely return for the next session. Is there anywhere I can see the schedule for more live streams?
On our website, there is a landing page in under 3D Bootcamp where you can see where the schedule for the different bootcamps are, and what there will be. That I think we're changing a little bit of it up for the coming month, but stay updated on there or on our Instagram, and that will sort of be informative for you guys.
Okay, and somebody says, CADA looks like a fun school, but why is it paid?
So the reason why we're paid is because we're not government funded. I'm not a politician. I don't know why it's not government funded. We are cheaper than any other education in Denmark. If you become like a social health helper, social assistant, that takes 2.5 years, and it costs 425,000 to educate one. And by that standard, we are trying to keep it as cheap as we can for the students, while still being able to pay my salary, rent, licenses, whatever we need to teach people 3D, get guest teachers in from the industry. Currently, we have Lawrence Marvitt, who is a big name, used to work for Disney and Pixar. It's absolutely amazing. And that just wouldn't be possible if we didn't have some sort of economic backing.
All right, I think that's all the questions. People writing thanks for a great stream and saying goodbye.
Yep.
So yeah, we can end the stream.
See you guys next week. Well, no, not next week. This is a test stream. Bye-bye.